I once used a borrowed vehicle to take a round trip that was about 200 miles to home. We were going to drive it back within the same 24 hours. Around 50 miles into the return trip, a huge black truck with a trailer stops roughly 400 meters ahead of us at an intersection on an underdeveloped highway we were on. The truck proceeds to wait for us to go by before finally pulling onto the road. To be clear, this person had roughly a full minute and a half to make the turn and waited deliberately for us to pass before moving behind us. They proceeded to drive so closely to us that if I decided to brake suddenly, it would cause an accident, and I did not want to be stuck on a road with just me and my 17-year-old friend. I kept slowing to around 20 miles an hour and pulling as far to the side as possible. With no cars passing, I used every signal possible to tell this guy to pass. He continued to ride closely behind us for around 60 miles on the middle of this highway in the desert before my friend and I decided to pull into a gas station to relax for a bit. We got some water and food at this random Shell station in the middle of nowhere and finally calmed down. The truck had passed as we pulled in, so I felt way better. We get back on the highway, and I'm not joking, before any other possible turns, we passed the same black hillbilly spray-painted truck, pulled to the side of the road. A guy runs from the bushes, zipping his fly, and hops in the truck. We speed at roughly 75 miles an hour, so I don't get a good look at his face. Just a brief look at his sandy hair in the sunlight, and a horrifying moment of realization when he hopped into the passenger side of the truck. Up until now, I'd kept my cool. As the adult in the scenario, I tried not to panic, even as they managed to catch up with us around 4 miles later. At that point, they continued to ride closely behind us. I tried to stay far enough over for them to pass without compromising my position on the road, but I was finally starting to feel like a rat in a maze. At this point, only 2 cars had passed, going the other direction. Finally, we made it to a very populated city. Even after making several turns, just about 6, they were still behind us, and I was done playing games. We stopped at a restaurant and ran straight inside. The truck pulled into the parking lot across the street and kept going around for about 15 minutes. We ate and then went the opposite direction, about 3 miles, before turning on the road we were supposed to be on. We didn't see them again, but we calculated they had been following us for roughly 170 miles. I dread to think what would have happened if we would have run out of gas anywhere on that road. Thank God we had borrowed a hybrid. Another factor being that the truck was definitely not a hybrid. They must have filled their tank at least once on this trip. That meant that they were prepared ahead of time to not have to make a stop at a public gas station. One summer, a coworker of mine and her now husband decided to go to Ontario to visit friends and family. While there, they made the decision to camp out over the weekend by one of the many lakes scattered throughout the province. One campground that they had been directed to by friends was beautiful but absolutely packed with holiday goers, and if you're anything like them or myself, you find that the more secluded a campground is, the better. So they choose instead to head down the road a little further where they had seen signs for another campground. The new site was breathtaking, she said. Absolutely stunning, with huge maple trees and a sandy beach with the waves lapping gently on the shore. However, it was dead empty, not a single camper or a tent in the entire place. But they just couldn't seem to understand why people would choose an overly packed campground while another perfectly acceptable location was just a few kilometers down the road. They didn't think much more of it after that and simply paid for the night and set up a tent while going about their evening business, hanging around the fire and taking in the lovely surroundings. She told me that they went to bed roughly around 11:30 p.m., just after it got dark. My coworker awoke in the middle of the night to a strange feeling. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't put her finger on it immediately in her sleepy haze. She laid there for a while, and rather than drifting back off to sleep, her feeling of unease grew as she pulled further awake. Suddenly, she realized what was wrong. There was breathing, extra breathing, not that of herself or her boyfriend, but the sound of someone else just beyond the walls of their tent. She laid quietly for a second, making sure what she heard wasn't only in her imagination. At this point, fear was gripping her heart and taking breath from her lungs. Slowly and quietly, she shook her boyfriend awake, urging him to be silent. Both of them had no idea what to do. Sure, they could emerge from the tent and confront the person, but what if there was more than one, hiding in the dark? What if they had a weapon? My coworker and her husband didn't have anything to defend themselves with other than basic camping necessities, so they spent the night wide awake, listening while whoever was standing just beyond the protection of the tent breathed easy, occasionally moving from one side of the shelter to the other, but never doing more than lurking. The next morning, the sun came up. They heard footsteps of someone slowly walking away from the tent. They immediately packed up all of their belongings and left the site. Now they had a pretty good idea of why such a lovely campsite like this had been so empty. On their way out, they informed the owner of the campground of their nighttime visitor. It was an elderly couple who claimed to have no idea of who it could have been or why someone would spend the entire night watching their tent. Regardless, they left quickly and never went back. To this day, she still says it was one of the most unsettling and scary nights of her life. I'm a 19-year-old woman. This happened to me yesterday. Since last week, a red hatchback has been parked on the street in front of my house. I live in suburbia, so there's a curb followed by a narrow strip of grass, the sidewalk, and then my lawn. People commonly park along the curve, so I thought nothing of it. However, after a few times of seeing this car, I noticed someone was always inside. That's what roused my suspicion. I usually get back from school in the late afternoon, approaching the evening. My father doesn't get back from work until about 8 p.m., and my mother works an evening shift, so I see her briefly as she prepares to leave for her job. This leaves me with around 2 hours of alone time. Whenever I walk back from the bus stop after school, the hatchback is nowhere to be seen. Only when my mother heads out does it pull up on the curve shortly after. I like to look out my window and make sure she's gone before I have a cigarette. While I'm doing this, the hatchback usually arrives within a minute. Talk about punctual. I'm not sure how much one can legally tint a car window, but they must have been at the max, because I can't see anything but a faint outline of a person. Call me sexist, but in my mind, it was always a man. I then try to forget about it and go to my backyard through the sliding glass door for my daily cigarette. During my smoke, I can't help but overthink the situation. It creeps me out even though it's just a parked car. When I come back, it's always gone. Every day, as soon as my mom leaves, there it is. It's just another routine day now. I come back from school, hang out with my mother, and then she leaves for work. I look out the window to watch her leave and see the hatchback arrive, get freaked out, calm down, and then plan on having a cigarette. As I'm walking to the back door, I whip out a cigarette and put it in my mouth. Then, pat down my pockets for a lighter. I didn't have one, so I changed my direction to go to my room. Now this is important. My house is a U-shaped. The backyard is a little nook within the walls, and my room is all the way up the U on the left side. I can see the backyard through my bedroom window. While I'm searching for the lighter, I see a guy pressed up against the house beside the sliding glass door trying to hide. He was wearing jeans and a black hoodie with the hoodie pulled over his head, so I don't know what he looks like and never will. I call the cops immediately and sprint to the living room to check if the hatchback is empty. It sure is. I told the cops to go straight around to the back as the man was there. I locked myself in the washroom and stared at my wristwatch and listened for the ambient noise. I heard a car pull up. It was the cops. They took him to the cruiser and came back to check with me. They said the man had been hiding in my backyard and he had a knife and duct tape in his pocket. I'm very grateful that I was unprepared that day and didn't have my lighter on me. However, I'm still paranoid because he really didn't do anything, and I don't know what the cops can do about that, and I'm worried that he'll eventually come back. I'm a 27-year-old female. I've only been in my new place for about a month, and after this experience, I highly doubt I'm going to make it here for the duration of my year-long lease. The way that these apartments are set up is that each floor has its own set of doors that lead to 4 apartments and a fire escape door that only opens from the inside. I'm on the back side of the building, which places my patio about 10 feet from the fire escape stairs. I take my dogs out about 3 times a day, midnight being the latest I'll go out by myself. And every time I leave my apartment, I put the bar lock on my patio door and lock my front door without fail. About a week ago, we had a snowstorm and I cracked my patio door because I love the cold weather. It was a mistake because I let my guard down. It was around 11 p.m. and decided that since it was getting late, I should take the dogs out for the night and since they both hate the snow, this would be a quick trip. I go to lock the patio door and decide against it because I'm on the 5th floor and I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes. I get the dogs ready, grab my keys, and lock the door as I leave the apartment. I get down to the designated pet area with my snow-hating dogs and then let them do their thing. Then back to the apartment we go, and we get back up safely, or so I thought. This is where I thought I was losing my mind, but in actuality, this is where stuff was about to get real. As soon as I walk into my apartment, my dogs run over to the patio door, and I notice that the door is shut and the bar is locked. Mistake number 2, I immediately think that that's strange, but didn't connect the dots. I go into the kitchen and get the dogs a treat, and both dogs start going crazy, growling at the large cedar chest in my living room. And as I'm walking over to see what the commotion is about, I see a pair of eyes coming from underneath the chest lid. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what I was seeing, and calmly walked backwards to my front door, opened it up, and told my dogs, "Let's go outside," and they ran out, without leashes, and I immediately get them and myself into the car, lock the doors, and call the police. The police show up in less than 5 minutes, and they go up to my apartment, and after about 20 minutes, 2 officers are dragging this guy, who looks to be in his 40s, out of the building in cuffs. This dude has been watching me since I moved in, and had been stalking out my place, waiting for an opportunity to get inside, because he knew I lived alone. If that's not creepy enough, he had a fanny pack, and he also had a pocket knife, needles, ketamine, and a picture of me from the day I moved in, and his plan was to sneak through my patio door, wait for me to fall asleep, and God knows what else. Needless to say, I didn't fall asleep for days, because I thought he would come back. Luckily, he's still in jail, but I'll never forget those eyes.